There's this term that people use called floating voter, and what that describes is somebody who during an election can't make up their mind of which political party to vote for, and they're constantly flip-flopping backwards and forwards between making a decision. And the reason I bring this up is because this kind of describes how the vast majority of chronic illness sufferers actually go about trying to resolve their own issue. There are so many people out there who are desperately trying to heal and recover long-term from their chronic ailments. However, instead of actually developing a basic understanding of how their body actually works, what they tend to do instead is to delegate all of this to somebody online who sells their recovery story well enough to them. And they start on this thing that doesn't work, so they jump to this thing, which offers them no long-term benefits. So they go over to this thing, which again doesn't work. And then what ends up happening is they're stuck in this vicious cycle where they're spending year after year fully fixating on their health and attempting to recover. And years pass them by and they're no closer to attaining that goal of long-term recovery. And I'm totally not judging anyone who finds themselves in this vicious cycle, because I was stuck in it for over 7 years. But how do you actually escape this? Because that's the most important point to acknowledge here. Well, what it involves is having a basic understanding of how the human body should be working, what it is that's preventing your body from working that way, and then addressing the specific dysfunction. You see, the real reason, in my opinion, as to why you haven't made much long-term progress at all by following people's advice online is because the solutions that many of these people are offering are one-size-fits-all approaches. And I believe they're offering this to what is actually a problem that in reality requires a very tailored and targeted solution. So I'm guessing what's happened is that you've received one or multiple diagnoses and you're coming to the internet continuously, desperately searching for somebody with the exact same set of diagnoses as you, who you're hoping can provide you with the solution to your problem. But the problem is, when it comes to a chronic condition, all a diagnosis really is a description of what's going on within your body. So if we talk about POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, is basically just another way of saying that I get an elevated heart rate whenever I stand up. Or dysautonomia is basically just another way of saying my autonomic nervous system is behaving in a dysfunctional manner. These are descriptions categorizing your symptoms, but what they aren't are explanations that explain the origin or the cause behind the continuous manifestation of your symptoms. And I think it's very crucial to acknowledge that difference, because understanding the cause will then lead you to a long-term solution. And what I ended up finding out from consuming content from plenty of online gurus was that they were providing answers to try to fix symptoms without actually understanding what it was that was causing these symptoms to manifest in the first place. Because there are causes and then there are effects. And what a lot of these people tend to focus very heavily on is trying to influence effects that are created within the body, how to impact this hormonal level, how to improve your sleep, how to improve your gut function, how to slow down your fast heart rate, or how to change this vitamin or mineral level. These are all effects that are created within the body. And what I really mean by this is that all of these things are outputs or a reflection of the dysfunction that lies further upstream. And this realization that I had was the very catalyst that caused me to unlearn 95%, if not more, of all health-related content that I'd consumed over the previous decade. Because the human body works on a basis where it continuously takes on board sensory information from its surrounding environment and then sends this information to the brain for the brain to then assemble it and make sense of it, so that the brain can then command a particular organ or body part to behave in an appropriate way. So for example, the sensory cue could be a change in body position, a change in visual stimuli, a change in the external temperature of our environment, a sudden touch or pain sensation felt on an extremity of the body, or a sudden onset of a noise that we encounter within our environment. And then the motor command produced by our brain in response to this could be a shift in our conscious awareness or attention. It could be the movement of a limb. It could be the heightened or suppressed activity of a certain organ. It could be the increased or decreased release of certain hormones, or it could be the increased retention or increased excretion of certain vitamins or minerals. So what comes first is the sensory cue, and then what follows shortly afterwards is the motor command. You probably know this best from the analogy of fight or flight, where an external stimulus is enough in itself to bring about physiological changes within the body. However, this is an acute example. What about the bodies of those who suffer with the likes of POTS, dysautonomia, long COVID or CFS, where the manifestation of their symptoms occurs on a far more chronic basis? Well, could it be a case where a similar situation is occurring, but just on a far more subtle level? Well, that's what I discuss in extensive detail in the Unbeatable Blueprint online course, where your ability to detect changes in the likes of gravity, body position, and visual stimuli become a very pivotal part of recovery, as these are variables that are present during practically every waking second of every day. When I dug into this topic on a little bit of a deeper level, I suddenly realized that if my body was having issues with processing any of these sensory inputs, then it would be no real surprise as to why everything that was being suggested by people online wouldn't work. Basically everything, including diet, supplementation, meditation, brain retraining, and all of these other treatment protocols were really just tools that you could leverage in order to make temporary changes to the body before it would very quickly revert right back to behaving how it was before. Once people stop doing these things, their body just switches straight back into its dysfunctional state. And this was what I really wanted to get to the bottom of understanding as to why this phenomenon was occurring in my body and plenty of other bodies of chronic illness sufferers, whilst people who were fit and healthy appeared to be exempt from experiencing any of these sensations. What I ended up learning was that between sensory cues and a motor command, there were these sensory receptors and pathways that were basically responsible for decoding certain aspects of our external environment and then relaying that information to the brain via a neuronal signal. It suddenly dawned on me that if any of these sensory receptors or pathways were to have become damaged or just weren't working up to the standards that they should have been, then inaccurate and inadequate sensory information regarding our external environment would be being continuously delivered to our brain, and this would be the key variable that separated our bodies from the bodies of fit and healthy people who are easily able to bounce back from every setback. So it's the functional integrity of these receptors that is ultimately one of the most pivotal parts to chronic illness recovery. And as soon as I knew this, I knew that my goal was to have the function of these receptors assessed, identify any key dysfunctions, and then gradually work towards restoring my body back to its original and most functional state. So I eventually decided to take action on all of this research by flying halfway across the world to have the function of my brain and sensory nervous system thoroughly assessed. And wouldn't you know it, key dysfunctions were identified within my visual system and my vestibular system, meaning that my body was having issues with interpreting certain visual stimuli and gravitational changes, and this was the leading culprit behind the array of debilitating autonomic and autoimmune symptoms that I was experiencing. Remember a few videos ago when I showed you this graphic? This is the exact reason as to why fine-tuning these sensory receptors is the most effective strategy in actually achieving lasting improvements with your chronic condition. Because by doing this, what you're doing is addressing the furthest back root cause that starts off the chain reaction of events occurring within your body that ultimately ends up in you experiencing the array of debilitating symptoms that you do.